as Diane finished that reading with a flourish. This is the good news of the gospel. Seems like it's been 12 weeks since we were really able to say that without crossing our fingers. All those weeks of hard prophetic readings of seemingly the possibly bad news of the gospel. And here we are, finally. At the end of Advent, after all those hard prophetic words, here we are with this word of promise to an individual about how God is going to do what God said. We made it. As I tried this week to get my last papers graded and close down the semester, I was troubled by my own lack of Christmas spirit. I just wasn't feeling it this year. I don't know if any of you ever feel that way. I started baking the cookies, I started writing the cards, I started buying the gifts, but it just wasn't coming. That warm peace on earth, God bless us, everyone kind of feeling. I like that feeling. That warm, cozy, sweet, kind, Christmassy, baking cookie smell kind of feeling. Perhaps it was because I had a chest cold, or perhaps it was the precarious state of the world. Perhaps it was wondering about our homeless friends on the first 20-degree night in New Haven. But it was also a part of me that wondered, is Christmas just about sweet sentiment? Because that's often the expectation I have of myself, that I should feel this warmth, this universal love. And if I don't, I begin to wonder if I'm really doing Christmas right. Is there something more? Something more for me when the sentiment just isn't happening? So I picked up our Advent Reflections book that many of you wrote reflections for, and I read through the pages again, wondering what I might find there. And there was something there that I wasn't getting from my internal expectations for the season. And it was a direction from longing to hope. And that's what I found also in our scriptures for the day. Page after page there was longing for change, for peace, for transformation, for meaning, for purpose, longing for God and longing for Christ. And I realized I couldn't really get a Christmas spirit until I could identify what longing Christmas fulfills in me and our world, and how God does that. So I turned to our scriptures for the day to try to reconnect Advent with the Bible readings we hear, but largely go unnoticed in the Christmas rush. These readings that they're there, but we don't really connect them with American Christmas. They're sort of two different worlds. Listen to these scriptures again. What are they talking about? David is talking about building a house for God and this eternal line that will be created. Mary is talking about the same thing, about how this line will be restored through history and will bring about the Christ. I love the story from 2 Samuel, partly because it tells us how God responds to our longing. It's always in a way we don't expect or understand. The story is a great one. King David has finally been granted peace after the years of conquest and is resting in his new palace in Jerusalem. So David decides that God, symbolized by the ark, should also have rest, and says, I'm going to build God a house, a temple. But God speaks through Nathan, the prophet, to David and says, did I ask for a house? Where'd you get this idea? He reminds David and Nathan about the past. God has a habit of doing that. Every time God speaks, God reminds you what God has done for you in the past, how God has provided victory and a settled place for the people, and that a temple misses the point. God's covenant is with the people and the righteousness of the nation, not in a building. It's a familiar biblical theme. People shouldn't try to speak for God or box God in. I wonder if that's maybe what I'm doing with Christmas. This God will not be told what God should do or what God should want. This God refuses to be the God people want him to be. This God has peculiar and particular ways. But the story is not just about conquest and hope. It's not written actually at a high point, but it speaks to us in a very different way once you realize when it was written. This was not written when David was riding high. It was written many, many, many years later during the exile in Babylonia. When we realize that this was written after that great kingdom had been divided and conquered and its own people scattered. In this context, the story changes because it's not just about a God who won't be boxed in. It's about a nation who had built a temple and a city and a small empire and a kingship and who had lost it all. So when God says, I don't need a temple, it's a message of hope because the temple is gone. God didn't go away, it says, when the temple was destroyed. God is not in the building, but in the people and in their hope. And that hope is embodied in this dream that keeps coming up throughout Advent of a new king, descended from David, who will bring the people out of exile and hopelessness. It seemed a stretch. What did the promise of a line of extinct Middle Eastern kings have exactly to do with my world and my Christmas? I think the language of kings gets in the way, but the hope is universal. We are living in exile, hoping that the things we value most, faith, compassion, justice, kindness, truth, that these things still matter, and that they have not been overwhelmed by the evil of our world, by the sea of anger and selfishness and greed and callousness and lying that we see every day just by turning on the television. As we see all the institutions we once believed in, church and state, banks, business, all somehow tainted, we look for hope that there is a continuous line, an invisible church, a remnant, waiting for the day when the truth will again be heard and received. And that's the same hope we hear in the story of Mary. The angel says that the child to be born will be a king in the line of David, who will rule over the house of Jacob forever. The nation did return from exile, and a new temple was built, but a long line of oppressors, the Macedonians, the Seleucids, and finally in Mary's time, the Romans followed. The hopeful word of the angel to Mary is that finally the people will have peace and joy. Christmas spirit, it seems, is not just a sweet story about a baby in a stable. It is that. But it is the hope that God will remember God's promises and act in history to save the people from oppression and death. And so we sing, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. It can't get much more specific than that. The people's long oppression will end and God will appear. It's not a sentiment. It's not just warmth. It is a real hope. But the same God who refused to live in a house built by human hands fulfills hope in unexpected ways. And just as with King David, God seems to know that if we're given a chance to exploit God for our own ends, we will, of course. So God has to do God's business in unexpected ways and unexpected places. Whenever the people of Israel seem to identify their hope with a particular person, place, movement, or regime, God says, sorry, that's not it. And he says the same to us. When God finally does come, it will be in the most unlikely place, with the most ordinary people, just to prove the point. Nazareth is nowhere. Nazareth does not even appear in the Hebrew Bible. Nazareth is not on anybody's map. It is Wink, Texas. It is Tenney, Minnesota. And Mary is the most ordinary, unimportant person imaginable, a teenage girl from an unknown town. The hope we receive in this season is that we should believe that God will come to fulfill God's promises and believe it fervently, but we should also know that this God is the God of Isaiah 55. My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. When our hope gets too specific, when we identify it with a person, a project, a party, or even a church, we can be pretty sure it's wrong. This Advent comes at a rough time. The global economy is teetering, and yet the rich seem to get richer and more heedless every day. The food bank shelves are empty, nations are crumbling, and chaos seems near. But despair is not an option for us. Yes, we want a leader, we want a plan, we want a guarantee. We are planners, after all. But the only guarantee is that God will come where we least expect it. The Advent hope is that what is most important to us will not be lost or forgotten. But we cannot dream of the way it will happen. And the person who represents this best is Mary, often forgotten by Protestants out of fear that we might sound too Catholic. Mary is in many ways the linchpin of the Christmas story, for from her response to the angel and her song of rejoicing, we know that she fervently believes in a God who will act to save the nation and restore God's rule. She has the story down. She knows the promises, the dreams, the hopes of her people, specific as can be. But the problem is that story, wonderful in the abstract, has suddenly stopped on her doorstep. Take all your dreams of what might be, what God might do, what we might do. And suddenly it arrives and says, okay, it's you. It's going to happen through you. John van der Laar, a Methodist minister from South Africa, writes that what is extraordinary about Mary is her ordinariness. What is special about her is that she is not special. Christmas happens not because she was somehow more than human, but because in a very ordinary, normal humanness, she could imagine that the same God who had promised Israel eternal covenant, that this same God could choose her through which to realize his hope. Our God is not a God who picks princesses, hidden princesses out of every little girl or every little boy that imagines he's Harry Potter, that he will escape from his evil family and be selected as the one, the hidden one, the great one. Our God is the one who goes to the most ordinary person and says, because of your ordinariness, I choose you. Because I come not for the special, I come for all. I know it's a heresy in a place like Yale, but God's love or spirit is not focused on extraordinary people. Extraordinary people are interesting, but they have one problem. They're not ordinary. And since most people are ordinary, like me, those extraordinary people can't connect with them. So God takes ordinary people and by God's Spirit helps them to do extraordinary things. We sing about the town in the hymn, but it might as well be about Mary. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. Frederick Buechner, in his wonderful paragraph about the angel Gabriel, says, Gabriel came to Mary, and he told her what the child was to be named and who he was to be, and something about the mystery that was to come upon her. He said, you mustn't be afraid, Mary. But as he said it, he only hoped she wouldn't notice that beneath the great golden wings, he himself was trembling with fear to think that the whole future of creation hung now on the answer of a girl. The mystery of Christmas is incarnation, God and humanity meeting, touching, embracing. God's long, twisted love story with humanity comes down to this: the hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee. What is asked of Mary is, can you imagine incarnation? And can you imagine it now, here, in you? And that's what Christmas asks of us. Can we imagine it now, here, in us? There is a place, an untouched place, a center in each of us that has never been entered. A place where not only our individual longings, but the longings of all of broken and beaten humanity meet. A place inside. A place that only God can touch, if only we open the door. So one day in youth, in old age, at the least expected time, we have a dream. We hear a cry for help. We have an unexpected opportunity, and suddenly the broken pieces of the puzzle all come together into a whole that unites God's dream and our dream. Mary ponders, but she doesn't wait. Let it be for me, as your Spirit tells, a kingdom of peace with no end. Mary doesn't do what I was told. When something is offered, I was told to say no twice, right? You could accept it on the third try, an extra helping or a gift or an opportunity. Mary doesn't do that. She doesn't seem to care what anybody thinks about her because the story she knows is not about her. It's about being asked if you want to be the person through whom peace, joy, love, and hope will finally come into creation. Mary was willing to step out of her planned, ordinary life and step into the flow of God's grace. She was willing to hear God's message that her plans, her dreams, could only really be fulfilled if the dreams and plans of all were realized. And that is the promise of Christmas. That we will not be extraordinary individuals, but we will step into that stream of God's grace, responding not to individual needs, responding not to the plans that someone imposed on me, but responding to the cries of creation throughout all of history. In Mary, I found my Christmas spirit, hoping that God is not sleeping or forgetful, that those promises of peace and justice and healing have not expired, knowing that this God does not choose the best or the brightest, but always chooses the least likely to show God's glory. She believed that the hopes and fears of all the years met in her, and that God had the power to use even her. And God did. So what is the real Christmas spirit? It is the longing that our exile might be over, and that our reunion might come through the ordinariest of people, even me, even you.